Welcome to Biztechasia's hottest startup show. Our guest for today is Wai Fong. He's the chieftain and co-founder at StoreHub. StoreHub is an all-in-one platform that enables retailers and restaurants across Southeast Asia to automate and grow their businesses. Since its launch in 2013, the platform now serves over 15,000 retail and restaurant outlets across their key markets of Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, among others. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Wai Hong.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian.
Now, Wai Hong, for a start, tell us about StoreHub and its history.
Yeah, so StoreHub started, like you mentioned in 2013, actually out of my apartment in Shanghai. So whole backstory there, but I was living in China, learning the language. I was your typical Malaysian banana, could not speak Chinese. So I went there to fix that problem, and then we started StoreHub out of my apartment in Shanghai with my co-founder Chong Yu. And essentially, it was a very simple iPad-based point of sale. But over the years, ever since we started focusing on the Southeast Asian market, that platform has grown from just a point of sale to a full-fledged, all-in-one platform that serves everything from point of sale to inventory to analytics to being able to enable businesses to automate the process of understanding who their customer is and engaging their customer. So it's kind of a full-fledged platform, starting out very small from an iPad point of sale.
Okay, tell us in terms of your little ecosystem that you've built up, because as you said, it's a platform now. It's not just an individual solution.
Yeah. So I think the way that we've thought about StoreHub is that our core purpose and vision is to build this platform to help businesses succeed. And this idea of succeeding, especially for small and medium retail and restaurant businesses, really anchors itself in what we call the three pillars of business success, which is you got to run excellent operations, making sure wastage is managed, inventory is well managed, employees are well managed. You've got to figure out how to understand and get customers. And finally, you got to figure out how to engage those customers. So those are kind of the three pillars that we built pretty much our entire ecosystem around. So everything from the point of sale to inventory management, analytics, that all historically have been, we've been very focused on serving operational excellence. That means, our platform enables these guys to manage their business better, manage wastage, all that stuff. More recently, we have seen the retailers and restaurants use tools like QR ordering to reduce the challenges that come from not being able to find enough people to man the stores, and that allows them to collect customer data. There's also, I guess, the challenge of being able to engage with the customers. So how do you figure out a way to do that? A lot of businesses send out SMSs, but that's kind of manual. It's not very effective. We've all gotten that SMS with the 10% off, but then we all look at it and like, go shut it off. So how do we enable these businesses to, in a smarter way, actually automate that process of engaging in a personalized manner, sending out SMSs at the right time, reminding customers of interesting things. All of these are typically very foreign for small businesses. So we have an automation platform for engagement. So I think these three pillars really are how our entire ecosystem of products are structured around, whether that's in QR ordering, loyalty, engagement, inventory, and so on and so forth.
And Wai Hong, now, for me, what if this is a game changer for all these retailers, especially like F&B outlets and stuff like that, because the elements of customer loyalty, customer marketing, outbound marketing and stuff like that can be done even from an individual store. It's not something that a chain store has to buy a specific solution to do. And that's really democratizing then opportunities for even the single store owner. But could you give us a sense of the dollars and cents value that perhaps you've actually, I'm sure you've done case studies in terms of how you really help these businesses. Can you share some of those examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea you put forward is basically how can a small business get big business kind of leverage, but without having to spend big dollars, right? And the big dollars in this case would be things like, if you imagine a typical restaurant, 2, 3, 4, 5 front of house wait staff, all of that can actually be reduced. If there was 5 wait staff to potentially 2 or even 1. We've seen businesses half the number of front of house staff that they've used. And if for the businesses that don't have it, they've been able to focus these front of house staff on not the order taking process, less on the payments process, more on the movement of the food to the table, engaging with the customers more, taking more time to do that kind of thing. So we see it as much as like even 50% reductions on those costs. But more importantly, I think on the marketing front, right? Traditionally, to hire a dedicated marketing person that's anywhere, from 5 grand to 10 grand, kind of a month, kind of like pay. And we don't see a lot of the businesses that we work with, the smaller businesses, being able to afford these talent, and not just kind of the affordability front, but being able to incentivize or interest marketing talent to join them, given that marketing talent is such a highly in demand kind of like talent pool. But with the automations that we provide to them, they're able to kind of effectively do or at least automate the parts of marketing engagement that is very much what someone you bring in, basically what they would do instead. So that's kind of like the two fronts, not just in terms of cost savings, but in terms of just making something that's difficult to do, i.e. marketing engagement, a lot easier.
Now, as a business, you've grown tremendously, particularly in the last 12 months. So you've processed over 128 million transactions worth over $1.58 billion in gross transaction value in the last 12 months. That's a 40% increase over the previous year. What have been the catalysts for you to have such a strong growth numbers in the last year or so?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is that there's 2 factors here. One is there's market factors, and one there's our own kind of like growth in terms of the number of stores that we serve. So one thing that we definitely saw was in 2020, for example, when the pandemic hit, a very large number of stores closed down. On top of the closing down, most stores saw massive drops in transaction volume, anywhere from 30 to 90% drops. And so overall transaction volume in 2020 was very weak. We saw some recovery in 2021. And I would say about 30 to 40% of that recovery is kind of attributed in the 40% year-on-year growth. But the rest of that is really us seeing a massive surge in the number of new stores that are coming onto the platform. So in terms of I think at the end of 2021, start of 2022, business confidence started returning to most of the markets we were operating in. And within those markets, we were seeing, we actually tripled our sales staff to cope with the demand that was coming through as a result of business confidence returning. It meant, stores were expanding. Interestingly, a lot of spots in the hot malls, usually the top malls, is really difficult to get a spot. But we saw a lot of our customers getting spots there, expanding, a lot of new businesses reopening. Basically, the gap that was created by all the stores that shut down because of the pandemic, that gap was really being filled up, starting kind of like end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022.
Okay, now what does the competitive landscape look like for StoreHub in Southeast Asia now? Given that the sands, as you just mentioned, shifted a lot in the last 2 years.
The competitive landscape for us has always been, right up there. Like when we started StoreHub, there were 10 competitors in the market, every market that we were in. When today there are 10 competitors, if not more, in the markets that we're in. I think the competitive landscape has not changed in terms of businesses that are trying to serve the needs of small and medium enterprises, especially in the retail and the restaurant space. If anything, I think the competition is really, I would say there's a lot more of these kind of niche players coming out. So you would see certain businesses that are just serving QR ordering, for example, or you might see certain businesses that are just trying to build like an e-commerce store for a restaurant. So there are all these really interesting kind of like players that have emerged from the pandemic who are saying they're trying to solve very, very specific needs that they saw during the pandemic. But as far as companies that are serving the holistic needs of a retail or restaurant business, we haven't seen too many of those emerge, but definitely plenty of niche players coming up.
So one of the things, Wai Hong, if I heard your story and the growth of really StoreHub is the fact that because your journey is coming to its 10th year next year, you've basically built out that ecosystem and achieved product maturity. And obviously identified some gaps during the pandemic and then gone on and built product. Is that basically part of the reason why you've grown also so quickly?
I would say that's about 30 to 40% of the reason. In the markets that we're operating in, the product maturity is really important for savvy businesses, right? Businesses who understand the value of the 3 pillars of business success that I shared earlier. And so product maturity is important because, you know, a savvy business will look at the product or the platform and go, if I had to do this, you know, if I had to accomplish my 3 pillars of business success by utilizing 10 different pieces of software, it's going to be really painful. So they look at StoreHub and they go, great, able to really kind of like consolidate everything, do everything in a single platform. For a smaller business, that's really important because they don't have the headspace, they don't have the manpower to kind of get people to navigate multiple platforms. But I would say that a big chunk of our success in the region, in terms of scaling up, has really come from the maturity in our sales and acquisition engine. We are a technology company that is really, really strong in understanding what it takes to engage businesses and share in helping them understand the dream of what it takes to build a successful business. I would say our sales and marketing engine is actually more like 60% or 70% of the reason why we've been able to scale.
That's where a lot of companies in Asia fail. They have great products, but they don't have a great sales engine or great sales team. Could you share with a lot of other entrepreneurs then how they can build a great sales and marketing operation? What are some of the key elements?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. And I think the reason for that trend is because a lot of technology company founders are tech people. And so generally, and I'm a tech person myself. I played lots of computer games growing up. I got into a lot of hacking. I love computers. But I recognized very early on in building the company, and I guess my previous company taught me this, right? That sales, customer service, operations, these were the core, you know, kind of bits of any kind of scaling B2B technology company. And for us, I think I started out in the kind of like my kind of core business in my first company was really gaming Google. How do you get number 1, number 2 on the rankings? How do you utilize Facebook? And then channeling those leads onto a website which converts. So the first part of that game is the same, right? We got to figure out and make sure you know how to use digital marketing effectively. Until today, one of the funny things I've heard is that Facebook and us were very like close-knit because we were one of the first pioneers or early one of the first companies in Southeast Asia to really scale up marketing budgets with Facebook as a B2B company. I remember one of my friends was telling me he saw a kind of like a profile of StoreHub in the toilets of the San Francisco office of Facebook, and it's like, hey, you know, he's one of the few companies in Southeast Asia that's using Facebook effectively for B2B marketing before people will figure out how to use it. So I think for us, figuring out digital marketing is super important. But then the part that most businesses kind of struggle with is figuring out the sales process. And I use the word process, or I guess I should use the word system more than process, simply because a sales system is not kind of like, it's not something that is easily understood. A lot of businesses, a lot of startups, when they think about sales, they're like, okay, you just need to hire a sales leader. That sales leader will hire more salespeople, and salespeople just need to sell, right? Selling is just this idea of people selling to people. Yeah. But the truth is, sales is not just about people selling to people. It's not just about the traditional, what do you call that, cliches that, oh, people buy from people they like, you know, and so you just need to hire lots of likable people to do good sales. It's not quite like that, especially with SME B2B sales. With SME B2B sales, you first need to confront the reality that salespeople are not going to stay too long in their jobs, right? There's a high turnover of sales teams. That's really normal. That happens everywhere. And so how do you ensure that the people that come in are able to become effective really quickly? And how do you ensure that when they're there, they are well equipped to become good salespeople without having to go through years and years and years of kind of like experience? And so we build a lot of these kind of like concepts into the way that we design our sales system. Everything from how long does it take for you to call the lead? Is it 1 day? Is it 3 days? Is it 7 days? No, for us, it's 2 minutes. How long does it take for a person to come from freshly joined StoreHub, whether they are fresh graduate, 5 years of experience, 3 years of experience? How long does it take for them to effectively close deals? That's for us in our books, it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And if they don't get to the standard that we want them to get to, it's more boot camping. So there's all these different things that we are designing into our sales system that allows us to scale effectively. That's why we can have 70, 80, 90 salespeople across the region who are effectively closing deals and not stuck with this HO problem where you hire a sales champion, he hires more salespeople, and then you lose the guy, and then you're like, oh no, how am I going to make sales next month? That's the problem that most scaling startups face in this area.
And Wai Hong, that's really, really good pieces of advice. I hope our audience takes note of that. But looking ahead, what are some key trends that you see in e-commerce and retail?
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now is that there is obviously a big macro shift in the market conditions where consumers are tightening their wallets. They are figuring out, okay, where do I shift budgets to? And then on the flip side, retailers, businesses need to figure out, okay, as competition for a limited budget increases, how do we kind of like differentiate better? And the biggest trend that we've seen is the ownership of the customer base, or the ownership of who your most loyal customers are, the level of engagement, the ability for you to turn them from transactions into relationships, from transactions into a community that you're able to lean on for product, product market research, for being able to build stronger kind of like pipeline for new customers. How do you leverage your community to bring on referrals? This kind of thinking is becoming more and more important. It's not just becoming more and more important, it's becoming front and center for many businesses, simply because they can start to, they're starting to see these pools shrinking. You can't just wait for people to walk past your store anymore. That's no longer the case. So I think that trend is really interesting because even though the trend is like, it's like this wave is coming, even though the wave is coming, a lot of businesses are not ready. They're not ready to think in this way, to act on this kind of philosophy of building real communities, building real relationships with their customers. Most businesses are still stuck in looking at just transactions. They look at the dollars and cents. Just every transaction is not attached to a person. And that's the reality for small, medium businesses. Of course, for more mature businesses, we've been doing this for years, right? We talk about the CRM, we talk about all this sophisticated stuff. But for the mom and pop stores, for the retail stores down the road from you, for the restaurants, these are not quite the reality for them yet.
Now, I want to zoom in on the company itself. You've just raised $13.5 million US in a pre-series B funding led by 500 Global, as well as your existing investors, Vertex and OSK, among others. How are you going to deploy this capital, and what are your expansion plans like?
Yep, $13.5 US. It's definitely two things that we always think about and have always done with kind of like every round of funding. The first one is it's always expected of us to scale up what's working in the business, right? And so we talked about the sales system. We talk about our 70% of where we're at today is because of the acquisition engine that we've built. So a chunky amount of this funding will go back into scaling the reach that we have. So 15,000 stores today, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. A good chunk of this funding will go into scaling the reach of merchants that we have on our platform. The second bit is really the deepening of value that we're creating for these merchants. We talk so much about the challenges, the trends, and the difficulties that businesses have to navigate in these kind of really changing times. And a lot of that comes from really consumer behavior changes. And so how do we support and enable and empower businesses to not just operate really well? How do we deepen the value that we're creating for them in engagement? Today it might just be sending on an SMS. Tomorrow, could that SMS transform into an entire referral program that a merchant can run by themselves? Could it transform into more interesting experiences, gamified experiences for their consumers? That it would be a massive angle that we're working towards in creating value. But of course, the main differentiation for us is that we're focused on an SME market base, which typically does not have in-house marketers, and we're focusing on automation. So we don't want to be creating too many tools that people don't know how to use. We want to be creating as much methods and systems that a smaller business will be able to say, tick, 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 turn these things on, and it would just work. So I think that for us is something that we are really excited to invest further, to do more R&D, to invest in more technology development, so that small and medium businesses can really automate the entire layer of customer understanding, increasing your customer base and engaging these customers, and continue to just focus their limited attention on making great coffee, cooking great food, and running a good business.
Now, Wai Hong, I want to zoom in on you, the entrepreneur. This is your second startup. Your first startup was OzHut. Tell us about that, and what are the lessons that you learned in your journey that you perhaps implemented when you were starting up StoreHub?
Yeah, OzHut is kind of a really interesting story. So like I said before, I'm a massive technology geek. I studied in Singapore for 4 years, but I got into a lot of trouble, almost lost my scholarship there from trying to hack the computers, because we were trying to pay less money for computer gaming, and they were charging us an arm and a leg. Fast forward to uni, I failed 5 subjects at university. I went to the University of Melbourne because I was playing Dota competitively, and just spend more time in the cyber cafe than in the university. So this kind of trend of my life, just really centering around focusing on things that I'm particularly interested in, and computer gaming, was kind of a very interesting natural transition for me after I graduated to start a business, and specifically an e-commerce business. That business started simply from just helping an uncle out, putting a bunch of things on eBay, and that kind of one thing led to another kind of story where the business grew, and a whole bunch of things happened there. So yeah, I think that was how I kind of accidentally stumbled into entrepreneurship. I know a lot of people these days, they're very intentional about their entrepreneurship journeys. I was more of an accidental entrepreneur in my first kind of startup. And I would say that the transition from that business to this business was also kind of more natural, in the sense that I started realizing that I tend to be very frustrated with the world. I look around me and I see a problem, and I get very personally, frustrated, or I get this holy discontent. Oh my God, this thing could be so much better. And that's when I tend to find myself expressing ideas and say, how can we actually solve these problems through a vehicle like a business? Now
then, with StoreHub itself, what are some of the lessons that you can share of things that you've done right?
I thought you were going to ask things that I've done wrong.
That's the next question, actually. We start with the ones you've done right first.
Yeah, I have the best co-founder. I think that's one of the most important things you must do right. We've journeyed together for almost 10 years now, and I can tell you it has been a really, really roller coaster of a story. So getting the right co-founder, definitely did that one right. I would say finding the right investors, definitely did that one right. Vertex, I'll call them out. 500, I'll call them out. Those guys have been, actually Yentuck, my angel investor, I'll call him out too. Those names, they were not just investors from a money perspective. I know a lot of investors like to do strategic, value creation for businesses they invest in, but these guys went above and beyond that. And so I think having the right investors was really important. I think personally for me, the people aspect of the business were all the right things. I think we thought about culture from a very early stage. We didn't just leave culture to when you found a head of people, when you had 200 people and so on and so forth. I actually built a culture deck and designed the values and the vision for the company when we're 10 people, when we're 15 people. And I was very intentional about how we did these things. And we talked about, for me, an old mentor of mine once said that if you want to change the culture of a group of people, you change the language that they speak. And so we were very intentional about how we could introduce a specific type of language into the way we function as an organization, because we recognize that you want to change, culture, you change language. And so those are some of the things I would say are top of mind when it comes to the right things.
So Wai Hong, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I really picked up a lot of interesting little anecdotes that I'm going to execute in our business at Biztech. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I think we're definitely living in this really turbulent times. And one of the most interesting reflections I've done with my team and my stakeholders recently has been how what may have seemed silly or stupid at a particular point of time would eventually reveal itself only much, much later. And one of the things that I felt really silly about was about 2 or 3 years ago, when the entire startup hype was just at its peak and everyone was raising a stupid amount of money at crazy valuations. I was kind of looking at ourselves and saying, hey, why we're not one of those guys. That we've always been very, very measured in our approach. We've always taken a more conservative approach to fundraising. We've always taken a more steady approach to growth. I know it felt like you were FOMOing every day about what was happening in the startup world and ecosystem. But today, we announced this round recently, and I tell other investors or other people I meet that I've still not done a down round in the last 9 or 10 years that we've been in this game. It's simply because we've not taken on and made promises to investors or potential shareholders that we don't believe we can fulfill. And so we've not had to raise a down round. We've been able to steadily grow over the years. And even when the market crashes right now, it's great to be able to say, thinking about this as a really long game has its benefits. I think most of us come into this startup phase thinking, let's build a company, 5 years, flip it, let's go. For me, it's a 20-year game. It's a 30-year game. How do we create value in an ecosystem, in a region that is with that kind of long-term focus as opposed to just the next 5 years?
Now, Wai Hong, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thank you for having me again. And thank you.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Wai Hong, the Chieftain and co-founder at StoreHub on Biztech's Asia's hottest startup show. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks for tuning in.